I see a lot of historians making this mythical Garfield like super presidency, and how, hey, if he wasn't like killed, he would be like this, he would be like the second coming of Lincoln, the first coming of JFK, because JFK didn't exist back then. And all I want to say is it's all cap. If Garfield survived the shooting, he would be no more relevant to civil rights than Rutherford B. Hayes or Benjamin Harrison. Because the fact is, back then, they wasn't going to do anything for African Americans. They just had Reconstruction, which was about 12 years of federal forces being in the South, the North spending money, and there were still riots, there were still killings, and there were still just mass voter intimidation. Now you're going to have them pull out troops to, I guess, 4 years later, because Garfield was elected in 1881, to send them back for a bunch of blacks, for a bunch of African Americans. No, no, they weren't going to do that. I'm sorry. If Garfield survived the shooting, he would be no more relevant to civil rights than, I would say, Benjamin Harris or Rutherford B. Hayes or Calvin Coolidge or Warren G. Harding. All of these people supposedly supported civil rights, but without a backing of the Congress, they did absolutely nothing. They could pass absolutely nothing. Nothing could have been passed whatsoever. And here's the thing, if he survived, he would be a strong vocal advocate for civil rights, but that's about it. He would do nothing. He would be no more significant when it comes to civil rights or passing anything significant whatsoever than any other president at that time. The only difference between him and a Benjamin Harrison or a Rutherford B. Hayes is neither of these people really got shot. And this guy got shot on the right side of history. He always was for civil rights, which was great. People like Benjamin Harrison was for civil rights, and he was the president during when the country turned 200 years old. But still, alas, he is no more remembered for civil rights than any other president. And that's what's going to happen with Garfield. In fact, if he survived the shooting, I would think he would be physically more weaker and less inclined to actually go out for civil rights, because back then they believed in conservatism, and they believed that the president shouldn't be a dictator, and thus he did not believe in strong federal action when it came to really anything. So to actually invoke civil rights and actually keep African Americans' rights in the South, you would probably have to send soldiers, which Garfield wasn't going to send soldiers. Congress wasn't going to send soldiers all the way back in the South when 4 years ago the same members voted to have the corrupt compromise in which they pulled them out. So this actually fever dream of like a Garfield civil rights super presidency that was cut is nothing but nonsense. This man wasn't going to do anything no more noticeable than any other president at that time. It's just that he was a martyr for better ideas that he could never execute. That's it. That's James Garfield. He was a martyr for better ideas that he could never, ever, 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 ever even try. I'm sorry. And you know what? I feel the same thing about Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was just like this moderate guy who wasn't for civil rights He really just wanted limited slavery, but alas, he changed with the times, and the times had a more radical tinge. Like everybody, where there was a short period where it was radical Republicans and people who actually like faked or like they cared about African Americans, but many of them cared about African Americans just to spite the South because they banned a huge block of people from voting. And alas, somebody had to take that block, and it was African Americans. That's why you had a bunch of carpetbaggers and so forth go down to the South. And, you know, it was this whole story. And besides, even if he did any federal like thing when it came to the troops, the Supreme Court back then was heavily against civil rights, so they probably would call it unconstitutional. So he would have to pull the troops back at some point. That's how I feel. So again, James Garfield, pretty cool guy. I like him. Sad that he got shot, but ever since the whole thing about like, hey, like death by lightning, and that's what my cover is. People has been glazing James Garfield when the fact is that at his time, at uh, during the Gilded Age, they mostly cared about like corruption and morality and stuff like that. People got sick of Republicans waving the bloody rag, as they called it, when it came to civil rights, and nobody, Congress, so forth, nobody wanted to send troops back into the South because the only way you can pass as many bills as you want, but the only way they would have protected civil rights back then was if they sent troops down in the South again, and they wasn't going to do that. They did that for 12 years. They did that twice the length of the Civil War. In fact, three times the length of the Civil War, because the Civil War, I think the Civil War happened in 1860 or 1861 and ended 1865. I'm gonna say twice the length of the Civil War just to be. I was about to say three times, but no, I'm gonna say twice the length of the Civil War. So twice the length of the Civil War, they had troops in the South for Reconstruction. Reconstructed lasted longer than the Civil War, so that shows you. And you know, so yeah, just to give y'all a heads up, James Madison, lightweight, don't believe the hype. I mean, good guy, good intentions, everything like that. James Madison would be like to civil rights what Calvin Coolidge is. Calvin Coolidge was a guy who legalized like all Native Americans to be citizens, but yet nobody really cares when it comes to civil rights presidents. Like nobody really mentions him. In fact, I'm thinking of doing like a future top 10 civil rights presidents, and I'm gonna mention Calvin Coolidge, and I might even mention James Garfield because he did throughout his life really care about civil rights. So did other presidents like Benjamin Harris and, like Rutherford B. Hayes and so forth. All these people really cared about civil rights, but without Congress co-signing their ideology, they would have gotten nowhere. It was Congress that was really the engine of civil rights. And I'm telling you, like during that time, they had something called the Forced Act, which was like 1890. It was co-signed by the president, and it was about like, hey, let's protect civil rights for African Americans. And they had a Congress of Republicans, and they did not co-sign that bill. They did not pass that bill whatsoever. So I'm telling you, James Garfield would have been a lightweight president on civil rights. I'm sorry to tell you this. I'm sorry to break your bubble. But if you saw that documentary, Death by Lightning, where it just paints him as a martyr, it's a reason why it's fiction. It's Netflix. It wasn't going to happen. I'm sorry. Bye.